You're not gonna introduce me?
I thought you were doing that.
Welcome to Hello Goodbye Lines. My name is Savannah Craig, and I'm here with Colin Dodson.
Hello, everyone.
We're gonna talk about police.
Not the band.
No, we had to clarify.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think about the band?
They're fine. Yeah. How about you?
80s classic.
Yeah.
Synchronicity 2, great album.
Okay. Good.
But we're not talking about the fun band. The fun 80s band with Sting. No, we are talking about the Montreal Police. Am I right?
We are, yes.
We're always talking about them.
Yeah. Do you think they're talking about us?
Hopefully. Hopefully they're like, what were Colin and Savannah up to? It's probably not.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, there's a lot to say. I mean, ever since I've been in Montreal, I've been doing a lot of reporting on policing, but I feel like it's consistently a hot topic in the city. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been a lot of developments in terms of policing over the last few years. I mean, in recent months we've seen lots of arrests at protests, but even in the last few years, just ballooning police budget, lack of accountability, and ongoing police violence. This is an issue, and as I've been noticing with at pro-Palestine demonstrations in the last few months, it's not just mass arrest, but there's also riot tactics being used. Even in a demonstration a couple months ago at McGill. I saw people pushed to the ground. Just really intense behavior by police directed towards activists. And ongoing kind of mistrust in police. I've noticed while reporting on this topic.
To ask our money not be spent on genocide, their answer is sending the riot police. This is dismantlement, this is suppression, this is a refusal of democracy, this is a refusal of dialogue. At 5 a.m., riot police came at the encampment, surrounded it, and forcefully removed all the citizens present on site. If I were the city of Montreal, if I were part of the CDPQ, the institution, I would be ashamed, because what they've done today is shameful. The police came and destroyed part of several installations that have been put on site. They came with no notice, we weren't warned beforehand. They just came and people were escorted out of the encampment. It took a few hours before people were allowed to get back in the encampment to recover some of their personal belongings, but they done so escorted one by one, escorted by police, by riot police. And the City of Montreal public service came and dismantled the totality of the Estimoud encampment.
Were there any arrests carried out during the dismantling?
I've been aware of there has been one arrest, but I have no more detail for now.
What is your reaction to police dismantling this encampment?
We came at Victoria Squares to establish this encampment with a clear goal. It was asking for divestment from the ongoing genocide by the CDPQ, which currently holds $14.2 billion in companies complicit with the ongoing Israeli occupation and genocide. We were also asking for the government of Quebec to shut down its Quebec office in Tel Aviv, Israel. So far, we haven't received any acknowledgement of our demand by the institution.
Following the dismantling of the encampment, how will you keep up the pressure on both the CDPQ and the Quebec government to remove their bureau in Tel Aviv?
For us, the struggle isn't ending with the end of the Assamud encampment. We will keep the fight going. We will keep fighting. Through this struggle, we've gathered unprecedented popular support. We've gathered a lot of support in the population, in the civil society. There has been more groups than ever concerned about the investments of CDPQ. So we're going to continue, keep up the fight. And we're going to sell on the institution. They cannot shut us down. We will continue. They cannot ignore our voice anymore. We'll keep up the fight until we divest from genocide and until Palestine is free.
Do you think that the removal of this encampment this morning has any relation to the court order that forced the U of T encampment to be dismantled 2 days ago?
Well, I think there's a really concerning discourse. It is all across Canada, but also across Montreal, where people have been a minority, but a vocal minority, have voiced that the public space, they've been against our presence in the public space. And I think that by responding, by giving in to those pressure, the City of Montreal and our institutions are playing a dangerous game. They are saying to the people, to the citizens, those peaceful protests, we won't listen and we won't allow them. So I think this is speaking of the greater. Yeah, I think this is a really preoccupying situation that they gave in, and they are attacking our right, our right to protest, our right to demonstrate, and it's just not only against us. There have been similar repression against our comrades in the University of Sherbrooke. In here, I'm at McGill, similar at the Faubourg encampment. We are here. We are standing. We must say no to. We must refuse those dismantlements.
Following the dismantlement of the Al Samud encampment this morning, what are we seeing at the two other encampments in Montreal right now?
So far, I've been informed that there's a growing police presence around the Faubourg encampment. So I've they have so I don't have any more information at the moment, but there's a growing presence of police. People are fearing another police intervention today at the Faubourg encampment, which we absolutely denounce. Also, I'm currently standing here at McGill University. So here in McGill, there's also growing concerns because the police have said they would came by 1 p.m. They're still not here yet, but they're saying they will come into the camp, and I've heard to force their way into the camp. So what we're seeing is a growing climate of repression, and I find that really preoccupying.
Since the Al Samud encampment was first set up, could you explain to me a little bit about just regarding the police presence and if there was any, intimidation from police towards campers?
Well, there has been constant police presence around encampments. Also, I must say, I must say, in fact, there are legal concerns for me personally to speak on this issue right now, because I've been arrested by the police on July 1st on several criminal charges. So for me, it's difficult to comment on this, but I must say there was police presence.
The Montreal Police, the Caisse des dépôts et placements du Québec, and the Office of Quebec's Ministre
de Relations Internationales et de la Francophonie did not respond to a request for comment before the deadline of this report.
It has been interesting in the last few months, just seeing activist interactions with police and growing mistrust in police. It kind of reminds me of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests.
Of course.
Yeah. Which, what was your kind of sense of how people, I guess, approached not just police, but specifically the Montreal police in that year?
Well, I mean, I guess to place in the wider context, right? In 2020, you had this kind of like mass like uprisings around like all of like North America, other countries as well. About this was a reaction to the death of George Floyd, right? And this was like a huge moment where people were really, and this is like the violence of cops against Black and Indigenous people is nothing new, right? But it's sorts of the violence towards them and the injustice, I think, kept like each death kind of like creates more and more kind of like anger and anger at the police, anger at the lack of justice against this, and it kind of like really boiled over in like 2020, where a lot of people, I felt there was this forward movement in this kind of like line of thinking of like, what should we do about this? Initially, we had like, when we go back to like the 90s and older kind of like, I don't want to say anti-police, but sort of like when people talk about police reform, there's talks about like not using the nightstick, where that was something that was like an old kind of like position people would hold, where like to reform the police, we need to make sure they no longer use nightsticks, and then for some cops they remove the nightsticks, but then afterwards it's like the violence kind of continues through other kind of means, right? They don't have nightsticks, but they're still whatever using their like tasers, and they're still using their guns. Afterwards, it was kind of like a thing, and this kind of continues today still, where people talk about like body cams, or like this kind of like they need to be with more body cams, maybe this police violence will decrease. And we see it really hasn't. In fact, if anything, like usually police will turn off their body cams, or they'll kind of interrupt that kind of stuff. Anyways, so with the George Floyd protest, like, and the sort of or super incredibly critical of the police protests that happened in like 2020 around that time, there's this. I thought there was a significant shift in kind of like talk about like what kind of policy is needed for this, and that's when you got the defund movement, where people were like, this is actually just like a thing of like how much resources is allocated to them. We don't think more resources should be allocated to them. We don't think they should be given more more time, they should manage their own resources. And I mean, I don't quite remember, at least not in Montreal, I don't quite remember instances of violence. And that's just not to say that it didn't happen, but that's not in my mind. But it was definitely a point of like, I think the police were like square in the middle of like people's minds. There's like an incredible like dissatisfaction with how policing is done in Montreal. Mm-hmm. And like you can go back further, right, to like 2012 and see how they handled those protests. Even before that, how they would handle other protests against like G8 protests, or like kind of like the anti-globalization protests. And they really like use like violent methods towards like people. I mean, I always talk about this, but like tear gas is like tear gas is not allowed to be used in warfare, but then cops everywhere use it against their own citizens, right? So it's kind of like this. To me, it's like a perfect example of this weird logic where like we would not use this against whatever could be considered like an enemy of the state, like another country. Of course, we would not use this against enemy soldiers, but we will use this against our own citizens. Mm-hmm. We will use this against activists. I mean, Montreal police, they've even gotten like a warning by the United Nations, I think, Council on Human Rights, for their tactics on how they kind of kettle people, and the United Nations Human Rights Council was like, yeah, you guys cannot be doing this, right? I think it just goes to show the and this is also just like recent memory, right? In the last maybe 20 years, these instances. But of course, this kind of violence goes back much further than what I've just described. But yeah, violence is their tool. That kind of they have police, not just Montreal, of course, but police have a monopoly on violence, and they're sort of the ones who are allowed to use that tool of violence.
Yeah, many interesting points, but the body cam part really stuck out to me, just because it's something I kind of think of when I think of quote unquote police accountability, or at least the promotion of having of what may look like police accountability. And just to kind of name a few statistics in how much the police budget has grown in Montreal. This year it's $821 million. That's a $35 million increase from last year. And in 2020, the year of the Black Lives Matter protests, when people, were taking the streets and they were demanding for not only justice, accountability among police, but they were also demanding for these budgets to be reassessed and funds to be removed from, soaring funds to be removed from the police budget and reallocated into, essentially social development, like just organizations and budgets that reinvest into the community rather than police them. And, at the time in 2021, the police budget was $665.3 million. And, at that time, our Montreal mayor, Valérie Plante, she said that she was open to reform, and just a few months later, continued to approve an increased budget. But back to the point about the body cams, is that was something she said that they would look into. And I don't think that was ever approved to be a part of, the Montreal police having body cams. But it's just kind of, like these back and forth statements of, oh, I'll look into this, I'll look into that, and then just continuing on with the status quo. Yeah. Speaking of Mayor Valérie Plante, she came into power in 2017, and at the time, a lot of people really viewed her as a progressive mayor, and kind of ushering in this progressive wave on Montreal municipal politics after former Mayor Denis Coderre. What was your kind of sense of Plante at the time versus, how you feel about her now, or the general public's view of her now?
I do think she's a progressive mayor, right? But I feel like these faults or these issues of her kind of acquiescing to police, I think that's part of being progressive. I think a lot of people, this is like that's when we're talking about like who her base is, who, like, because she's in power, she has to cater to a different audience, right? Like, that's in politics, it's easy to make big promises when you're not in power. It's like you kind of promise like the world when you're not in power. And that's, I think, how she came to power, because she was promising big kind of structural changes. So specifically, like, I think what makes her sort of progressive or ostensibly leftist was this kind of big public spending project she had for the Pink Line, right? Because you had not seen that, no one had seen that kind of public investment in public transportation for like a long time. Not on that kind of scale, right? Most of the time it goes towards fixes or buying more, adding more cars to the fleet, adding more buses to the fleet. But her vision was kind of like this, of course not her vision alone, but part of her pitch was this metro line that would kind of go through neighborhoods that are pretty poor, that are denser, that were kind of underserved by public transit. And she got elected, I think, for like a decent part of that was that kind of appeal, right? And because, of course, she's an environmentalist, she's like, she's green, I guess how that's changed now is I think she's kind of been doing what she's always kind of promised, I think. Like, there is this thing of like, well, she's a leftist, well, she's like, I don't even know how much of a leftist she is. Well, I think sometimes there is like sometimes a limit to what a person can be as a leftist if they haven't done the kind of like self-work of thinking about their kind of like standpoint or their kind of position in society, right? And this is what I mean, like, where we talk about our identities as like as men, as our identities along with like the spectrum of gender, sexuality, class. I think is one of the most important ones, where we grew up, who we're sort of like billing ourselves as, and that naturally kind of means that we experience life in a different way than others. And I think Valérie Plante, being the sort of like white environmentalist, white progressive even, I think there's I think the experience of Black people, Indigenous people, is sort of outside her kind of range of experience, right? And naturally, that kind of makes it outside of maybe of her priorities. Or a lot of times people like that, of course, not to say that there aren't incredible like people of these identities working in solidarity with these communities, but I think it is a thing to kind of be aware of. And to me, when I think of Valérie Plante nowadays, I think of that being the kind of main issue, where she is not only like this kind of like white progressive who will not stand up for police rights, because who will not stand up against police, overreach, It's because the sort of police, the institution of police, is sort of meant to serve this kind of crowd, right? It's meant to serve like white property owners, and that's at that kind of identity is at like the center of politics, like municipally, federally. It has been for a while, and like it's when we think about like the early like history of like Montreal municipal politics, it's like the people who could vote were like you had to be a man over 35, something to that effect, and you have to own land of a certain value, right? And then it's been extended since then, right? So like more people can vote. But like if we think about the institution as having that in the heart of it, as it expands, that still remains at the heart of it, right? And that's when things like the Montreal Police, they're meant to like whatever protect the rights of like property owners, and they're sort of like their main kind of like demographic client will be kind of white people, right? And to me, that's sort of the one of the walls to I guess Projet Montréal is that kind of community that they serve. They serve the people who are against any Godel, which is like absolutely, I'm part of that ship. I think he was not a great mayor. I think there's just tons of like ways that he set the city back. Did not move it forward to where it needs to be. But I think, to their credit, I think Projet Montréal is doing some of that work of moving forward. But they are absolutely moving forward in this specific kind of direction of whatever white environmentalism, of one that is not really concerned with class, concerned with I guess like the way that Montreal's institutions kind of cause suffering upon like Black and Indigenous people in Montreal, right? And that's I think the line with police is the one where you see that clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I guess nowadays it's like she's in power now, Projet Montréal is in power, and then once you're in power, you sort of like there's this sort of thing where you sort of start to take on the ideology of whatever machine you're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like I think as much as you have good intentions, as much as and there's a lot of great people with great intentions and good like kind of like character in Projet Montréal, but just being at the helm of like a city and that those kinds of machines and how the city's meant to serve like let's say like I want to say the merchant class or like kind of like business owners, right? There's always talk about like, oh, how do we make sure the business owners are happy? How do we make sure like the downtown kind of like restaurant people are happy?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like it's just like they kind of have to take on those sort of that kind of audience, that kind of like I keep wanting to say client, but that kind of person because that these people were the ones who were mainly served by the city and the city's institutions, and so as they take on the helm of the city, I mean they've been in power since 2017, like you said, but their sort of their priorities will change to reflect that of whatever administration they're occupying, and I think we see that, right? We see like this group that's come in with great intentions. I mean, they've done a lot of great stuff. Like I won't like knock them down for that. I think like the city is like really beautiful. I think it's great. I think we should be incredibly proud that we have such a strong biking infrastructure. But I think there's like so much more that like a municipal government could be doing, right, and pushing on. And I think when I talk about pushing on, we're talking about just courage, just kind of like bravery to take those steps further to further whatever like project or the political project we want. And I think while maybe there's a lot of people in Projet Montréal who maybe want to kind of stand up to the police, or maybe they want to sort of like institute these kinds of changes, but there's a lack of that kind of like courage to actually just be the ones to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I think it's timely what you brought up about, the notion of like protecting property. And I think that's been something I've been thinking about the last couple of months, especially when it comes to the McGill encampment, where, I think people were shocked, surprised, confused why the Montreal police didn't take down the McGill encampment, despite, McGill's numerous requests for them to, almost pleas, it looks like, for the police to take down this encampment. And, the police, their stance was essentially, it's like, this is McGill's issue. But there was also that balance of, when there would be protests such as the June 6th occupation of the James Administration Building, or, various other protests that ended on McGill campus or happened on McGill campus, where, like windows were shattered or anything like that. There was heavy police presence, there were arrests, and there was also police violence. So it's kind of this interesting situation where this, many people would assume that the police would be like, okay, private property, let's take down this encampment. They didn't. However, they did move forward with raiding various other encampments in Montreal that were on city property. So it seems to be kind of this jurisdiction thing, but there still is this ongoing, I guess, legacy of police protecting private property.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they're designed to do. I think when the Montreal cops were, the Montreal police force was founded in like the 1840s, it was like their whole thing was just like kind of like protecting shop fronts, catching thieves, and that's like I think that like from then, of course, it's extended to have all these additional services. But like again, like I really want to insist on like if that's the core of it, that's gonna remain the core of it until the core of it really fundamentally changes.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's kind of interesting just like contrasting with, the protests we're seeing in the last, I guess, almost 10 months now. And in 2020 where, there was a lot of, I think in 2020 there was a lot of comparison of police forces across the globe and just being this, legacy of white supremacy, of slavery. And I think it's also interesting, there's been many conversations I've had with people I've interviewed who have compared the police here in Montreal and Canada as well to the Israeli defense soldiers and saying that they have similar tactics.
I mean, it's like a bunch of I think that it's a common thing that the IDF will give kind of training courses to like police like stations around, not stations, but like kind of forces around the world.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, not around the world,
US.
but especially in the US, right?
Yeah,
And of course,
yeah.
there's going to be the overlap here as well.
Yeah. Even one Palestinian woman, her name is Samar Abdul. She hosts almost daily sit-ins outside of Immigration Minister Mark Miller's office. When I interviewed her after the McGill occupation of the James Administration Building, we had an interview because she was essentially on the front line. She was pepper sprayed, and one of the first things she said to me was, the police here are so much like the IDF. And she's like, I know this. I grew up in Palestine. Now I live here. She grew up in Gaza specifically. And I had another conversation with her last week, and she said the same thing again. And it's just, I think, what she's trying to identify is the brutality, the surveillance, like the kind of feeling of always being watched. And, she often does really put herself on the front lines of these protests, and she's really carried by wanting to demand justice for Palestinians in Gaza and the violence, and also, she's really carried by the loss of her daughter Jenna, who died in Gaza in January, and 2 weeks later she was approved to come to Canada as a refugee. So we're seeing kind of these ongoing pleas and demands to really change the way our police force operates, to really change the way activists are approached, journalists are approached, and we're just kind of, we're not seeing too much change. It's almost like this cycle. It was another issue in 2020, very well connected issue, lots of similarities, and here we are seeing it in 2024, and it's kind of the same thing. I don't think there's been as high demands to defund the police as there was in 2020, but I think that's still a conversation that has been happening.
I think, yeah. I think that to that issue. Oh, also, what a story from the Gaza. Just like my heart goes out to her. And she was pepper sprayed. You said was she
In the face.
was she the one who was what did she get pepper sprayed for? Like, what was the context?
Yeah. So the context was on June 6th. This was when the McGill encampment still existed. There was a group of activists who occupied a room within the James Administration Building, essentially to escalate their tactics in order for McGill to reach a settlement with the McGill encampment. And Samar, she's often at many of these protests, and I was filming from a fire escape. So I have a pretty good shot of the pepper spraying, but I also noticed her in the crowd, and she was like on either the first level of people or the second, and she was pepper sprayed right in the face. I saw videos of her online afterwards, but yeah, pretty horrific.
I think that comment about her experience with the IDF and the experience with the Montreal cops being like very similar is so damning for the cops. And I don't know. I think I mean when we talk about like these police forces as being these sort of dealers of like violence, right? These kinds of like pushers, these thugs, right? About like, and they're sort of defending private property. In this case, McGill. In other cases, maybe just like whatever, like institutions, right? I think it's upsetting. I think it's incredibly upsetting to hear about like sort of like our tax dollars are going to that, right? It's like people are hungry and like the money is going to make sure that whatever like cop has enough pepper spray to bully people who are just I mean of course like yeah, this is what I wanted to get to, where there's this thing where it's like with these kinds of like activist activities you have this clash between the so-called like our freedom of speech, right, in Canada, in the West, and like the West, Canada, the U.S. especially loves to talk about, this is a place where you're free. You're able to like say what you want. You're able to express yourself, and then like that's the beauty of it, because they'll say like in North Korea you can't do this, in China you can't do this, But then it's like if you're like a protester and you're just kind of like protesting stuff and like naturally escalating to like whatever to make yourself heard, and then you're being shut down by police. If this happened whatever in like China, if this happened in North Korea, I think people would of course be much more willing to like criticize it, as they should, right? But then when it happens here, there's like a different attitude from it about it, And this is not just I mean specifically like some kind of whatever this imagined like general audience is, right? About like this imagined kind of crowd who are upset at the protesters, who are upset about how they're like interrupting daily life and not kind of like letting them live their lives. It's like that's kind of the point, It's kind of the point to make you pay attention, to force you out of like whatever bubble of like daily routine where you get to exist outside of this kind of violence that people are trying to talk to you about. And I don't know, and the cops are like the ones who are supposed to be going into these like spaces and trying to force order, trying to force these activists not to interrupt kind of daily life, not to express themselves as they have every right to. I don't know, freedom of speech or police violence. I don't know. That's to me that's like one of the main kind of conflicts I see with like cops shutting down protesters or pushing back, or like even like, well, of course, like impeding on reporters doing their job, right? It's like if we think as a society we're about freedom of speech, then the police is one of the institutions that I think is the most against that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think those examples you just brought up, it makes a further divide between our public and the police force, and just kind of continues to grow this mistrust.
Yeah. I will say I think that divide is growing, absolutely, but I think not without reason, right? It's like if anything, I would be careful to frame it as the police is causing this kind of divide. The police is just sort of doing it so they continue kind of separating, continue using violence against certain sections of society, continue building that. It's like they build the distrust towards them, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't know. It's like I remember when the BLM protests were going on, people would make the point like, no one has a song that says "fuck the firefighters," It's like.
I can't top that.
I don't know.
Any last thoughts on these protests, on just kind of ongoing themes towards I guess what you could call like accountability for police?
It's I mean, to go back to the thing about like I mean, this is just to harp on an earlier point about like the kind of like body camera footage. So like I'll use this last little time to convince people who think a body camera would solve things. It's not going to, because like the fundamental problem is that like with the body camera line is that with more body cameras, with more footage, this happened with the Rodney King case in LA in the 90s, where people were like, because of the proliferation of kind of home video cameras, we'll be able to catch more acts of police violence, and being able to catch these acts, being able to like point to the act, like undeniable video footage of the act, will result in justice. And that was not the case then. It's not going to be the case now, because the case is not necessarily that there's a lack of evidence. Of course, that is like a big issue, right? If you go to a court case and it's pure hearsay. It's like he says, she says, the victim says this, the police says this. Who do you believe? The video evidence was supposed to be something that works against that, but it's not the case, right? Mm-hmm. It's not this injustice doesn't exist because of a lack of evidence. Mm-hmm. The injustice exists because of these kinds of like institutional levers that the police have access to, where they get lots of money, where they get lots of funding, and they kind of grow and grow like a tumor that kind of sucks resources away from like other parts of like the city, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like the real issue is not the footage not being there. Of course, I do think there is. I do think the increased amount of footage increases public anger, mm-hmm. because I think more and more people are activated when they see these kinds of videos. Like I do think the videos are good for that, but I do believe more public anger can result in justice, or can result in more pressure, right? But I think we need to. It needs to be more than just more people need to know about this. Mm-hmm. We're like less people can know it, we could still be doing the change, right? Yeah. But I do think more video evidence is useful in a certain degree, but there's a limitation to it, and I don't think justice is going to be delivered by video evidence.
Absolutely, and I think that really connects to what's going on in Gaza, where we're watching, you know, this horrific violence and people being brutally killed in 4K, and even as the protesters are saying, you know, we're watching a genocide in 4K, yet, you know, there's growing public frustration and demands to divest ties from Israel, to divest military exports to Israel, as well as, you know, Canada receiving imports from Israel. Yet here we stand. Yeah. Not much change.
There's a quote by this I think it's a Swedish historian. He wrote a book called Exterminate All the Brutes, which talks about sort of like these patterns in history of colonialism, and how there's this kind of like European drive to like dominate and conquer and like genocide these peoples. And of course he says European, but of course this is like a mindset that is absolutely kind of recreated and replicated elsewhere, right? If we think about like like the Japanese Empire and stuff like that. He has this. It's a line that's really stayed with me. It was I first came into contact with this line from a documentary series of the same name, Exterminate All Brutes, by Raoul Peck, the former Haitian cultural minister. He's a filmmaker as well. The line is, "It is not that we don't know enough." I actually forgot the rest of the line.
I was like,
It's not that we don't know enough. It's that we lack the courage to affect the change. It's something to that effect, right?
Okay.
I really butchered it.
Do you want me to look it up?
Yeah, let's please. I need to.
I confess some.
I like the rawness. What's his name?
Henry Lundquist. Exterminate All the Brutes. It's not that we know. It's not that we don't know enough, or something to that extent.
Oh, my bad.
No worries, I'm just gonna...
You really butchered it.
I really did. Wow. That's embarrassing. Where should I start off from?
Where you what?
All right. There's a great quote by Sven Lindqvist, this Norwegian historian. He has a book called Exterminate All the Brutes, which has an HBO series a documentary series called, it's by the same name, Exterminate All the Brutes by Raoul Peck. And this line really stayed with me. And I think it speaks to this thing of like, the more people know about an issue, the more likely justice is to be delivered, which I think there is a sense of that is true. But the quote goes, "You already know enough, so do I. It is not knowledge we lack. What's missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions." And I think that speaks to things like police violence in North America. I think it speaks to things like this settler colonial violence in Gaza and in the West Bank as well, right? Where we have, it's like as in the last, like since like October 7th, we have this kind of like just nonstop flow of evidence, hard evidence of injustice, right? And like I remember at some point I'm like, oh, surely this is like undeniable now, and that's going to change things. But it was never really a thing of like that these things were deniable. It's just that there's people who are in power, they're going to deny it no matter what. they're not gonna acquiesce to it. And at some points, of course, they do, but most of the time, the way things are set up, they're not gonna. It's not because they don't know; they know what they're doing. They believe in it, right? And it's about replacing them or getting them out and making sure that the system is interrupted completely. Anyways, that's yeah. What you just said made me think of that quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote. I think it applies very well. I mean, it's almost sometimes just like ignorance is bliss. But I also think that, a lot of these people know. They just pretend to be ignorant.
I mean, it's like the stuff with like Palestine. It's like all these injustices. It's not new, right? There's like even the scale of things are like not quite new. I mean, the scale of the last, of course, like few months is kind of new and like horrific to that regard. But like before October 7th, like the kind of like stuff coming out of like Palestine is always sort of like it's the same sort of level of violence for the last like decades, right? But it's just recently people have been saying that's enough, right? And I think that's one of the most crucial things where people are getting up out of their seats and saying that's enough. But then comes the next hard part, which is like, despite this kind of like mass unrest, this kind of desire for justice, it's like how do you get to justice? And that's like that's like an age old question. That's a hard. It's a hard battle, and it's like it's fought forever. Yeah, you need to just constantly fight.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Thank you. Thanks for watching, everyone, and maybe more police chats to happen in the future.
Guaranteed. Unless something changes in the next like month, which I don't think it will. There's always going to be something to point at and criticize and discuss.
Yeah. Thank you for your input and your insight.
Of course, it will. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. All right. Take care, everyone.